Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. In segment number 1, we saw another lawsuit, shock, surprise, surprise, involving the NCAA. There's 25 plaintiffs in the state of California, and some of these names are big ones, of guys that are looking for some extra eligibility. These are guys that if they become eligible, they are going to be very, very much guys that are going to be sought after, so we're going to talk about that. And then we did see a little bit of reclassification news as well. A good break for Arkansas. Davion Thompson, a top 25 recruit for the class of 2027. He's now going to be joining them, so we're going to talk about that. And then we'll wrap things up in segment number 2, talking with our good friend Nate Hornung. He does such great work over at Your Betting News, and we're going to chat it up with him about all these lawsuits, how the teams out there in the city of Cincinnati, the Bearcats and the Xaviers, were big-time beneficiaries of this. We'll talk a little bit about the SEC with Texas having Marcus Spears Jr. reclassify and so much more. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUDEN_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Of course, I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions, because I do want to make this the greatest college basketball season of all time, get you set with everything humanly possible that I can for this upcoming college basketball season. So if I know what you want to hear, I will be able to deliver that a little bit more. And the conference previews are going to continue. Might slow down here in the next few days, because now you've got a lot of murkiness with these rosters. Fortunately, I'm going with more of the mid-major teams that are probably not going to be chasing after a lot of these transfers that are trying to come onto the open market, but big giant ball of wax here with so many of these guys that are filing to try to be able to get extra eligibility, as we saw 25 plaintiffs out there in the state of California wanting an injunction to be able to play for this upcoming college basketball season. Some of these are smaller names, some of these are bigger names. Donovan Dent is the biggest of them. He ended his retirement a few days ago, and, well, I'm going to talk about this with our good friend Nate Hornung. Gonzaga is looking for a point guard. This seems like it would be a very good fit, so he's a guy that is out there. Sky Clark, who spent the last few seasons over at LSU, is trying for some eligibility. Parsaf Fala, he was a really nice player over at Oregon State, a well-traveled guy, a big man that should be able to provide some help. He's out there. Jaden Henley was relatively solid over at Grand Canyon last season. Kendall Blue, not really a guy that's going to move the needle too much. The Diaz-Graham brothers, who spent the last few seasons over at Pittsburgh, they separated this last year. They weren't necessarily great. They're out there. Javon Porter, that's the brother of Michael Porter. He made some impacts over at Missouri. He made some impact over at Loyola Marymount as well out there in the WCC. He's onto the open market. Nick Townsend, he was a guy over at Yale last season that was a flamethrower from 3. Jackson Kaler, one of the best players for Michigan State. Aiden Mahaney, he was the WCC Player of the Year a few years ago. Charles Johnson, Isaiah Carr. Carr is a guy that can make a little bit of impact. Tayshawn Comer, he's a guy that was at the mid-major ranks, a double-figure scorer a few seasons ago, if I'm not mistaken, over at Eastern Kentucky. Corey Stevenson, a little bit more of a mix-and-match guard. Casey Abikwe, a big man that really could never find his footing. Braden Carrington, he was solid over at Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, Wisconsin. Joshua Ward, not necessarily a great guy. Jeremy Dent-Smith, Benny Geeler. So you've got some Stanford guys out there in the state as well. Josiah Davis, Duke Brennan, who was a really good rebounder this last season over at Villanova, over at Grand Canyon as well, and then Jordan Pope. Like, these are impactful guys. I forgot about Elijah Fisher as well. He's a guy that can make an impact as well, but holy crud. We have got ourselves a lot of guys that, if they become available on the open market and they're being represented by Ryan Downtown, Sweet James Benninger, and Darren Heitner, I believe, this would be very impactful. And then you have to figure that if these guys are successful, guess what? You're going to have more guys suiting the NCAA. Just a big, giant mess for these guys. Like, why didn't they do this in April? Like, Summer League is already pretty much come and gone out here in lovely Las Vegas. You've got no rhyme or reason whatsoever. We all knew that they were pushing for this 5-5 rule, and now you've got all these guys that they were not grandfathered in, wanting to be grandfathered in, and the NCAA is pretty much the Washington Generals of the court system. So they're going to be losing even more court cases. These guys are probably going to be getting eligible, and we shall see what happens there, because I'm looking at you, LSU, I'm looking at you, Gonzaga, I'm looking at you, Michigan, teams that don't necessarily have their rosters completely filled yet and probably have some money. They are probably going to be able to get that. And then with Arkansas, them being able to have Davion Thompson come in, a top 25 recruit that was a point guard from this past season, that is going to be big for them, because obviously you lose Darius Acuff from last season, and Malik Thomas was a guy that really impressed me over at Summer Lake. I thought that there was a good chance that he was going to be coming back. So Arkansas, they needed a little bit more help at the guard spot. You're going to be no doubt having Billy the Kid Richmond as a 6'5", little bit of a combo player helping out. But keep in mind, DJ Turn It Up Wagner, he's another guy that transferred out of the program as well. It's right now just a case where you're trying to keep up with the Joneses out here in this conference, because for the SEC, it is an absolute gauntlet. For the SEC, you've got Texas making moves, obviously Florida bringing back pretty much everyone other than Walter Clayton from that team that won the title 2 seasons ago. Tennessee really bulked up. Alabama's going to be locked and loaded once again. You could just keep going down the list. Kentucky brings on Milan Mimicevic. Like, man, this is going to be an absolutely stacked conference once again, and they needed to be able to make a little bit of a move, because Arkansas has visions of being able to make it even deeper in the NCAA tournament that they have the first 2 seasons under John Calipari. This is going to be able to help them out quite a bit with that regard. Do I think that we're going to be seeing this gentleman and Mr. Thompson be coming in and instantly being like a 20-point per game guy or anything like that and be like a transcendent player? No, but they needed a little bit more backcourt play, because they are bringing in some relatively nice players down low. Cooper Bowser, I think, is going to be relatively solid. I love the fact that they've got these wings like a J.J. Andrews, who as a freshman I think is going to be solid, and they need a little bit of insurance, in my opinion, for Jordan Smith. He's a freshman as well. That should be just an absolute game breaker in the backcourt as well. They needed a little bit more of a ball handler. Jeremiah Wilkerson is going to be able to help out with that as well, but now they've got a little bit more depth to get set for the upcoming season. I like this move for Arkansas, and what else I love, getting on our good friend Nate Hornung, better known as Shaggy Betts, right here on Coast Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast. That conversation on the flip side. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN, because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Nate Hornung aboard. He does such great work over at Your Betting News. He has done an incredible job taking a look at the FIFA World Cup, which unfortunately that comes to an end this weekend, but he's doing such a great job on that front. I know that he's getting set for some football all 12 months out of the year. He does an incredible job taking a look at the wonderful game of college basketball. He's based out there in the Midwest. We love Midwest guys on this podcast, and when you go on to his Twitter/X feed at Shaggy_bets all together, you'll see pictures of dogs on there. So absolutely love that. And Nate, always love getting you aboard. Thank you so much.
Hey, happy to be here, Greg. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining me, Nate. And my goodness, it has been a wild last few weeks in college basketball, to say the least. And just what do you make out of this landscape? Because typically this is a really dead time of year where it's like, all right, we just sort of kick our feet up, relax, we'll get a start maybe on some conference previews and everything like that. But all of a sudden, we've got a whole bunch of rosters that have changed, and the outlook of a team like a Cincinnati, the outlook of a team like a Xavier, that's all of a sudden very, very different than what it was just mere weeks ago.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. Like you said, typically we do get a few down weeks of the college basketball offseason, but that's just simply not the case. Even with my own Kansas Jayhawks making some signings left and right, LJ Kaysen is into the portal as well from Michigan, so a lot to keep up with. And yeah, we've still got a few more weeks before these rosters are certainly finalized, and we can really start getting into the nitty gritty of this season.
Yep, and how do you take a look at some of these teams that might be looking to sign some of these fifth-year guys? Because I've noticed the teams that they go into the transfer portal late and they bring in these guys. Like I think the most famous example was Kansas State back when they were under the tutelage of Jerome Tang. They signed Coleman Hawkins, and we all thought that that was going to be great, and that was not great to say the least. I do think that it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because while there are now some very, very talented players that are out there for the taking and can be signed, I do have a big time fear, though, that it's going to be really throwing off the chemistry. And I think that it's just a question of how much does the chemistry outweigh, shall we say, the overall talent?
Yeah, with all these guys, coming into these rosters late, it's just less time to gel and get ready before the upcoming season. Typically, the guys are usually on campus, come springtime and have plenty of options to get used to each other. But that's not the case anymore with guys, coming in late. So it does take a lot of time for those guys to gel, get the new pieces all moving in the right direction together. One roster I'm still looking to get finalized is this Gonzaga. Gonzaga's roster, especially the front, or the backcourt, I think is looking a little slim. So I would like them to maybe make a few more signings if they can this transfer portal season. But other than that, teams are running out of time before they can get everybody moving in the same direction.
Yep, absolutely. And obviously LSU as well. And how about you take a look at a team like an LSU with all the tomfoolery that has happened, with all that they've been trying to do, as almost being accidental winners in this because we thought that they were going to be all out of options to be able to sign these guys. Now you've got all these teams that have spent their money. You've got so many teams aside from like a Gonzaga, Michigan, they lose LJ Cason, so they've got a roster spot open. But a lot of teams, they've got roster spots that are closed off, and these guys are looking for eligibility and they're looking to play a fifth year. They have to go somewhere, and LSU can offer more playing time than darn near anyone else in the country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing time and maybe even a little more NIL money that they've got to spend as well. So yeah, LSU could be a prime candidate to land some of these big name transfers late in the season. But again, I don't know how much faith I have in that roster. Obviously Will Wade didn't really turn the NC State program around like people thought he might and bring it back up to a top contender. And I just don't know if his second term here at LSU is going to be the same thing. It's a very stacked SEC conference. It's just going to be tough to get back to the pinnacle of college basketball for the LSU Tigers. Even the one transfer that's now playing on his third SEC team, Mohamed Diabate, plenty of experience in this conference. I don't know how much of difference it's going to make just because he's got his opponents have so much familiarity with him.
Yep, I do agree with you there. He was a guy that was very solid last season over at Kentucky, but when that's one of your main guys, because they really went for it. They went with Yam Madar, who did not get eligibility. If RJ Lewis gets eligibility, I just have no idea what we're doing here. They are very much dealing with a lot of, shall we say, question marks right now. As joining me on the show, we do have our good friend Nate Hornung, better known as Shaggy Bets, over there at Your Betting News, joining me right here on Cusco Soups. And we have been seeing a whole big giant avalanche of news over the last few weeks. And how do you take a look at the two teams out there in the city of Cincinnati, the Bearcats and the Xavier Musketeers? Because they have been the two teams that, in my opinion, have been the biggest beneficiaries. With MJ Collins, who was last season a part of that Calhoun system. He comes over and was averaging 17.5 points per game over at Utah State. He now gets eligibility. And then you got Philip Orvichinen, who he was over at Xavier last year. He was actually their top rebounder. He was another one of those guys in the lawsuit that got eligibility. And unlike a lot of these teams where they might be signing someone late that is just joining the process and are unable to get down the system, these are two guys that they know the system that they're with. In my opinion, they're two guys that are very, very rock solid players already. And I think that these are the two teams that when you take a look at everything that happened with the lawsuit were big giant winners.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like you said, MJ Collins in Cincinnati, because I'm a big fan of Calhoun. I love the system that he ran at Utah State, and I think he's going to run something similar here in Cincinnati. And getting MJ Collins, a guy that's good for 30 minutes, 17.5 points per game. I mean, just a pure scorer, a go-to guy, and again, familiar with this coach's system. So not only is he going to be able to implement things immediately on the floor, he'll be a great voice in the locker room, getting everybody on the same page. Like I've said before, moving in the right direction, all moving towards the same target. So that could be huge for the Cincinnati Bearcats team that, has a lot to replace with obviously the coaching change and Mustafa Cham moving to Michigan. But I think Cincinnati, kind of had a bit of a spark towards the end of last season. I think they could kind of build off of that, and getting MJ Collins in there is huge for that team.
Yep, no question about it. And then I'm so glad that in passing you talked a little bit about Gonzaga as well, because they've had one of the more, shall we say, interesting last few weeks in college basketball because they didn't do a ton in the transfer portal. You just sort of figured, okay, they're going to be running it back. They're going to be rock solid out there in year number one of the Pac-12. Now they lose Mario St. Cyprien, who, for my money, he was their top three-point shooter last year. He decides that he's going to be playing in Spain, so we're seeing these international teams are losing so many players to college. They're now trying to strike back a little bit more. But for Gonzaga, they now have an open roster spot. We're hearing so many people thinking, oh, Donovan Dent is coming out of retirement. He might be landing at Gonzaga right now. And I think that they're an interesting team to watch the next few weeks because even though I always hate speculation, I don't want to put the cart before the horse or anything like that. It feels like Donovan Dent to Gonzaga might indeed be inevitable.
Yeah, and it does seem kind of like a perfect fit. With St. Cyprien leaving, he was, I think, primed for a breakout sophomore season with Gonzaga. But yeah, going back to Spain. But I think it does make a ton of sense for Donovan Dent to, move into that spot. And Gonzaga, kind of like we talked about with LSU, towards the end of the transfer portal here, has some roster spots open, might have some extra NIL cash to play with. So it could be, again, a great landing spot for one of these big name transfers coming back late in the season. And yeah, one of those guys might be Donovan Dent seeking out a fifth-year eligibility, which, maybe he gets, maybe he doesn't. But, if he does, I think Gonzaga is the perfect landing spot for him.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and that's going to be one that I think is of intrigue. And I do have to address this as well because I know you're a little bit of a Kansas fan. I just threw a nice tray over at Kansas State with them signing Coleman Hawkins a few years ago, which we all remember how badly that went. But do you think Kansas might be one of those teams that might be looking to add a piece or two? Because it was big that they were able to get Stokes late in the process, the number one overall recruit in the 2026 campaign. But I think that you'd agree with me. These guys like Keno Dawes and company, they're solid transfers. They're not necessarily the guys that you look at and you think, wow, that's going to elevate Kansas, though. Out there in a really rough and rugged Big 12 with all these guys applying for eligibility, I feel like Kansas might be one of those teams that tries to go out there and gets a guy or two, and Kansas, it feels like, is one of those few teams that might actually have some NIL money to be able to give one of these guys.
Absolutely. And yeah, as a Jayhawk fan, I would love it, especially a guy, kind of like LJ Kaysen, who's a huge 3-and-D guy, good for 18 minutes, 8 points off the bench last year for Michigan, shooting 40% from beyond the arc. I think he'd be a great fit for Bill Self's system. And, also I love the signing of our guy, I'm going to butcher his name, but Mihailo Mushikic, I believe the Serbian big guy, really adds to the front court there, going up with Paul Mbaya as well. So I really like the front court for Kansas, but as far as the back court goes, I would love to see them go out and add a piece. Give me a good shooting guard would be perfect for the Jayhawks.
Yep, I do think that they need a little bit more shooting pop. I think that if they can find one of those guys that are currently going through the lawsuits and are trying to be able to get some eligibility, that would be a big land for them. As joining me on the show, we do have our guy, Nate Hornung, better known as Shaggy Betts over there at Your Betting News, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And another piece of news that we need to take a look at is, while the transfer portal has really been dead, and it's probably going to be heating up here with all these lawsuits here in the next few weeks, but while the transfer portal is dead, there's still been roster movement. You mentioned it with Kansas signing a few international men of mystery. We've seen South Carolina add a lot of those guys as well, but we've also been seeing reclassification with Texas Marcus Spears Jr., and I still remember watching Marcus Spears on the football field, so it makes me feel very, very old when I say that one. Him reclassifying, joining Texas, I think that's so interesting as well, because in the SEC, I don't think that there's any question that Florida has to be the number one team right now, but in terms of number two, I thought it was going to be a foregone conclusion that I'd be penciling in there Tennessee, but now I'm starting to take a look at Texas, and I feel like I have to have them in the top three in my SEC, and I feel like this could be a team that could be poised for a massive season.
Yeah, I think I've talked about it on the show with you before, but I'm very, very high on Texas this year. Love what they did in the transfer portal, specifically, getting David Punch from TCU, Isaiah Johnson from Colorado, really, really adds to their offensive weapons. And then, now getting Marcus Spears Jr. to help that front court as well. I think it's massive for this Texas Longhorns team that, in year two of Sean Miller back there, I think they're going to be, one of the better teams in the SEC. Maybe not competing with the likes of the Florida Gators, like you mentioned, but definitely a top five team, perhaps a top three in that very stacked conference, which is huge for the Texas Longhorns.
Yep, and it's going to be interesting to see where LSU lands because we still don't know what their roster is going to be because they had Jan Madar denied his eligibility, which very rightfully so. If we're giving eligibility to guys that were drafted in 2020, I don't quite know what we're doing. It's one thing when you have the guy from Auburn who was drafted and he wasn't even going through the process, and it just feels like the LA Clippers had no idea that he was actually going to be going to Auburn or something like that. That's one thing. The guy drafted in 2020, that's a whole different ball of wax, but I think that we've got a lot of intrigue out there in the SEC as well. And with regards to Michigan, with them losing LJ Kaysen, where do you have them now? Because I believe that we did talk about it a few weeks ago. We were both in agreement that Michigan still does have to be in the top 3 in the Big Ten. And even with this loss, I think that they have to be there. But I feel like there were a lot of people that still felt like Michigan was that number 1 team in the Big Ten, even with Dusty May leaving. I think without LJ Kaysen leaving, that makes it a little bit more difficult to keep Michigan at that number 1 spot if you had them there before.
Yep. Oh, no, I agree completely. And, I think they're definitely still in the top 3 with Michigan State and Illinois, but I would kind of give the nod to the Fighting Illini and Brad Underwood with what he's added with the portal, what they're returning as well. With, their 7-foot twins with David Mirkovic coming back, Andrei Stojakovic now back in the mix, and then Stefan Vox as well. I really like this Illinois team. I think they're primed to make another Final Four run. But yeah, Michigan probably not quite the set in stone top team in the Big Ten anymore, although I would still put them in the top 3 of that conference.
Yep, I'm in agreement with you there. I think that it's the 2 Michigan schools, Michigan, Michigan State, and then Illinois, and I'd be leaning a little bit more towards Illinois myself. So we're in lockstep on that one. And then to wrap things up, my friend, I know that there's been a lot of news in college basketball over the last few weeks. We've got just a lot that is happening in general. And with everything that's happening, is there a team or two that you're starting to change your tune on a little bit? Maybe you're feeling a little bit more bullish/bearish on. It could be a team that maybe got one of these guys eligible with the lawsuit. It could be just a team that you evaluated a little bit more, and now you're feeling a little bit better/worse on. But is there a team or two that you're starting to have a little bit of a change of heart on?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've mentioned them, and, it's a bit of a homer shot here, but my own Kansas Jayhawks, I was worried, Greg, going into this transfer portal season of what that roster was going to look like in November, but I think it is coming around great. Bill Self's got his a great depth in that front court, and we know how well he works with those big guys, their footwork, defense, all that good stuff. So I do like what I'm seeing from the Kansas Jayhawks. I think they're going to be one of the contenders in the Big 12, obviously a very, very stacked conference, but I would be very happy if the Jayhawks find themselves back in the top 3 of the Big 12 this upcoming season. So beginning of the transfer portal year, I was a little down on them, but my faith has been restored in the Kansas Jayhawks going forward.
Yeah, being able to get Stokes was such a huge add for them. That was one that happened late in the process. I do think that Keno Dallas, even though maybe he didn't light the world on fire when he was over at Utah, I think that he's going to be a very good fit with this system as well. And what's always a great fit with regards to this podcast is getting on great guests like you. Nate, you're doing such an amazing job over at Your Betting News. I know you've been doing a great job looking at this World Cup, which unfortunately comes to an end this weekend, but you've got your finger on the pulse of so many different things. You're getting set for football. You're always looking at college basketball and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yep, absolutely. You can follow me on all social media at Shaggy_bets. You can find my written work over at bettingnews.com, and then all of my media appearances, my streams on the Betting News Network. Greg, really appreciate you having me on, man. And I love your running content, sir. Yes. I hope your stomach's doing okay after your spin on the beer mile earlier this afternoon. And keep it up, man, because it's very entertaining for all of us. I love to see it.
Hey, behind the curtain, I just did that beer mile a few hours ago, and I'm doing this podcast right now, so you can tell that we are powering through. We do it for the people. We've got to give the people some entertainment, some inspiration, and Nate, he provides that as well. So a big thanks to Nate for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have 1 or 2 ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. We've been keeping it going for over 2,400 straight days. So I'm going to continue on with this podcast. Conference previews, like I said, might take a backseat for the next few days just because I want to see what happens with all these court rulings, see if more guys file in. But those are going to be continuing. The Metro Atlantic is going to be up next. Going to need to get our good friend Sam Fetterman on for that because he is a master of that, and we're going to look to be masters of making you guys some money this upcoming college basketball season once the season returns. Picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.